let's start. Chair Lee, if you're willing.
Yeah, sure. Welcome to the August 11th special meeting of the Ann Arbor Planning Commission, with specifically to the Comprehensive Plan Subcommittee meeting. The meeting is audio and video accessible, and to listen or speak at public comment, please call 213-338-8477 or toll free at 877-853-5247. And you'll want to enter the meeting ID 977-6634-1126.
Commissioner Lee, I'm sorry, I should have updated your script, as this is an electronic only. Anybody who wants to attend is already here, and there are no speakers. So nobody is watching, unfortunately, on CTN to call in.
Okay. All right. Well,
sorry.
No, not a problem. And as a special meeting, just a point of clarification, are we doing roll call?
No, we don't need to do roll call. I'll note attendance, but we don't do, because no action is being taken place. We do notice it as a public meeting. We make it available if people are interested in watching online, but since no action is being taken, it's just sort of just a subcommittee meeting. Okay. So with that, and we don't have anybody logged in, maybe I can just jump right into the content of the meeting. So I shared with you, thank you for getting this scheduled in such a quick time frame. We are starting to work with the consultant team on a lot of background data, where the consultant team is actually going to be in town the last week of August, setting up some initial stakeholder interviews with city staff and also elected officials for that week. We're going to be just orienting the consultant team to the city. We're going to be doing a couple of tours. The primary agents of the community engagement portion of the comprehensive plan are going to be both Interface Studio and Smith Group. So Smith Group already has a lot of familiarity with the city, but nonetheless, we're going to be including them as well, of course. We have done some mundane things like right now our GIS team is getting them access into the city's online GIS account. They have access to all of our data and the like. So starting to make some good progress. One of the things about our proposed work plan is to form a steering committee for the comprehensive plan. And this is going to be, I've shared the proposal with you, not like a monthly board meeting, but intended to be sort of a wide, diverse voices collected to at notable points in our comprehensive process to both validate our approach, make sure that we're asking the right questions, start reviewing the content as it's starting to form into policies and recommendations and draft documents. And so one of the things that I've been thinking that I would like to do is actually do a very public, open call for this steering committee. We don't have to do that. In the past, we have just appointed people. It could be comprised of members of various boards and commissions of the city. To be frank, I don't know that we will only appoint from this process, but I think this would be a great opportunity to make sure we're casting a wide ask and net to get as many interested voices as possible into that process. And so process-wise, my vision is that we will post and do sort of a very public call for interested parties. I'd like to go over this proposed application process with you as to some of the questions that we're asking to try to solicit information about who and why people are interested. And then I also want to share sort of attached demographic survey. I'm really interested in hopefully getting as much of that information as possible so that we can essentially curate to the best of our ability a really diverse and inclusive steering committee as we go forward. Process-wise, after that application call, what I envision is staff working on some sort of preliminary ranking recommendation back to this board based on the applications received. What I would like to do is go through that process, come back to you and say, hey, this is what we've got. These are recommended appointments. These might be gaps that we think could be filled in the following manner. I would ask that you help staff come to a recommendation about what that steering committee would be. Then we would bring that steering committee to the full planning commission, and the planning commission would be the entity that actually formally appoints that steering committee for the purposes of the comprehensive plan. That's my process. The steering committee, I'm targeting, I'd like to keep it less than 20 people, ideally, that's 20 is sort of my cutoff. I'm setting that because honestly, the consultant was recommending no more than 25. And I think if I set the target at 20, there's always going to be some desire to sort of move up. So that's where I'd like to start. I think that's manageable. It's a lot of voices. Let me stop there for a minute. Does that process seem valuable to you? Any concerns about it? Ready to jump into the questions.
Let me just go.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe the only thing that I have missing is like the rubric. That'd be nice to be shared before staff evaluates to report out on.
Okay.
Just to know what's kind of the qualifiers are.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't have that formed in my head. I know I wanted diverse voices. I know I want different perspectives. I don't yet. But I think that would be valuable, and it might even be valuable to have at least a concept of that available so people know what they're going to be measured against. To be clear, I don't envision this to be strictly a sort of a mathematical scoring in any regard, but yeah, I think it'd be helpful. I think that's a good point. These are the factors that we're going to be looking for.
Yeah, and maybe we'll get into it, but it's things like, do we want to make sure we have a slot of a representative of BIPOC community, the student population, the renter community, make sure we fill specific slots for 8 of them before we have kind of open slots. So that kind of specificity would be really helpful to kind of see how it's measured. Cool.
Maybe if we have time, we could sort of come back to that after we go through the application and brainstorm maybe what your thoughts are on what that rubric might look like and some of the things that you'd like to make sure we address. I could share screen, but I've shared this in advance with you. So I was just maybe going to talk through it unless you'd prefer I do that for some reason. Starting with the sort of questions, I just want to share we are going to be asking for name and address. I think a geographic representation would be valuable information to understand as it relates to this committee. I am asking if they have prior experience with boards and commissions in the city, but also trying to make it clear that that is not a prerequisite. Just trying to get a sense of what their activity level has been in the past. Frankly, that could be a bit of sort of pro and con. I think if we were really trying to emphasize new voices, and I see somebody with a long legacy of a lot of service in the city, it might be an opportunity to give somebody else a voice. On the other hand, if it's an area of expertise that we want to make sure that we address and they have sort of a deep educational background or legacy of being active in that field, that we might choose to elevate. Number 3, describe your interest.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Ask a real quick question? Okay.
Yeah.
What about also asking like if they've had experience in another city?
Okay.
Maybe just being like, notify any experience in the city served.
Yeah. Or another community.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Thank you. I like that. If any other comments on that question? All right, seeing none. Number 3, I think is a little wonky, but we are at the core doing a land use plan. I formulate this just to describe why you trying to get to sort of why is land use your jam when it matters to community engagement. Lisa.
I think that's right, but I think that some people might not know what that term is. And so it occurred to me that in the very beginning of this thing, thank you for your interest in serving on the steering committee for Ann Arbor's comprehensive plan. I think a little definition of what a comprehensive plan is that includes a definition of what land use planning is would make this more accessible. And then when they hit that question, they won't be like, I don't even know what that is. I'm not going to fill this out. I'm already excluded.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If I'm trying to cultivate new voices, like, don't assume that people know what that term means and what it leads to.
Right. And then another related suggestion that we haven't gotten to this bullet or question yet was, I wondered if perhaps the number 7 question, which is what excites and or concerns you about Ann Arbor's future? I wonder if that couldn't come before the land use planning question, and just be something that's just right up front, because it's an accessible question, and I think we'll get a lot of interesting information out of their answers to that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. While we're talking about number 7, I originally I had like 2 questions there, sort of a pros and cons, but I frankly like just lumping it together to see sort of where people are drawn to. Are you like me, that you're pessimistic and you come from it like, I think planning department's stupid, or is it like a more optimistic, a more forward thinking? So but yeah, I like it. It's kind of less jargony, right? So okay.
I mean, I think too, for that land use planning question, if we were going to move that other question up, the question about, so then whatever I guess it'd be question 3, like it could just be describe your interest or experience with like helping shape Ann Arbor's future or something. I mean, whatever the comprehensive plan is supposed to do, rather than just land use planning.
Okay.
And then the describe questions, you don't need a question mark.
Right. That's right. I caught that too and forgot. I'm sure though about describe your interest or experience with Ann Arbor's future. I don't want us to actually lose the specificity around how come
Planning.
Yeah, like zoning, like, because there are lots of people who want to do enormous things that just can't be accomplished through zoning and land use planning, right? And so I think if we define that term at the outset, and maybe there is different language that we could use other than land use planning, but I do want to keep a focus on, I don't want to have a board full of people who think that they can make the city up from scratch. Yeah.
Can we put the word zoning in?
Yeah. So one of the templates the primary template that I looked at and I started evolving from was a similar call that the city did for an update to its urban forestry plan. It actually had a couple of terms defined in it. And maybe that's what I do here: comprehensive plan, zoning ordinance. And maybe it's just those 2, maybe something else will pop up, but try to maybe there's a couple terms there that we can help demystify the wonkiness of it and get to the interest. But I think that's right. Zoning is such a big tool. It's a hammer for every problem, but it is a hammer for every problem.
This is just like, it's not in the context of this, but I like what Lisa said about just making it accessible and some of these questions just being useful. And if there is even instructions that are like, please read through the questions, answer them to your best capacity, like maybe they're not all required. And maybe in the end be like, if you don't think you can meet these obligations, would you be interested in participating or facilitating in some other capacity? That we might follow up with them for a community-led event or something. Yeah. I feel like if it's up to 20 and we get 50 applications, we could be like, hey, run one of the toolbox events.
Yeah. The first 30 potential ambassadors, who knows? Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Okay. Yeah, sorry about the questions. All these were originally framed as, what is your experience? Blah, blah, blah. Please describe. And I just tried to simplify those and forgot how to be grammatically correct.
That's why we're here.
Yes.
Point out your errors.
Describe your experience working with teams to reach a mutually agreed outcome. Just sort of general, like, yeah, I know it's hard. Sometimes consensus is hard. How would your involvement support the inclusion of diverse ideas, peoples, and perspectives in this plan? This is one that evolved from a question from the urban forestry, which was more targeted. Are you involved in any initiatives or groups seeking to expand diversity and inclusion across our region? And I wanted to generalize that more so that even if you weren't part of sort of a mission-based organization in that regard, but still felt that you could really contribute to that in this regard, that we welcome that. So that's kind of where that language came from.
And I think the language is well crafted. I think it gets to what Lisa was talking about at the beginning about, hey, we want to make sure that we have different viewpoints and different blocks kind of represented during this. So, and I think that gets to the core of it, but leaves it broad enough for people to feel comfortable responding to it. So I like the way this is worded.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
What's your goal here in this question? Is it that you're trying to, well, I won't lead you.
Yeah.
I will let you answer.
Yeah, I frankly struggled with that question a little bit. Like I was actually having this conversation with Hank. I was getting some feedback from them on this, and they asked me the same question, and I was trying to I was honestly struggling with, am I just including this question because I aspire that this product is going to be diverse, the process is going to be diverse and inclusion, and I feel like I should? And ultimately, I think the benefit here was, no, I want to hear voices about how somebody in their own words can help us achieve that goal. And so it could be like, I'm part of this nonprofit and I know this is hard and I could bring a lot of expertise. It could be that I am part of a community that is not comfortable coming to a public workshop. I am part of an agency that services seniors, and I think we could be an effective partner in helping to solicit feedback, questions, and sharing information with this community. So I guess my goal at the end of the day is, this is an opportunity for somebody to say to the Planning Commission, I can help connect this process with voices that maybe we don't always hear from.
Lisa? You're on mute.
Well, yeah, I know. So this thing stood out to me as well, because I think it's hard to say, when I read what's just there, I would have a hard time speaking about myself, right? I don't know what necessary. So I was wondering, as you were speaking, could we say something like, our goal is to connect this process with voices that we don't always hear, and communities whose needs we don't always understand very well. What can you bring? Your experience or perspective, your networks, the service you do to help us with this. I don't know if that's too much, and I'm totally also willing to let this go, but I was trying to think about how to be more honest about what our objective is and what the kind of things that we're hoping people will bring to this committee.
Yeah, I think that seems responsive to, well, I guess Commissioner White wasn't necessarily asking for a change, but one of the things we could, just like you said, preface the question, our goal is to connect this process to voices and people that don't always feel included or heard. How would your involvement and support the inclusion of diverse ideas, people, and perspectives in this plan? Does that help sort of, and I think to the question about answer these questions the best you can, Lisa, you might not feel like you're strong in this regard. You might feel like, that's not going to be the primary thing that I'm going to be able to bring to this. And so maybe that's as part of that sort of introduction, like, tell us the strength and value you make. Like, if it were me, like, I frankly, I don't know that me as a middle-aged white guy would be the change agent that I would be like, I know how to do this here. So that's probably not the area that I would necessarily focus on. So I don't know. That introduction maybe seems to help that.
Yeah, and I was also toying with the idea of saying something to the effect of we value diversity, equity, inclusion within this process. And I do actually see the value of softening the question, because you asked somebody directly, how is your involvement going to improve, support the inclusion of diverse ideas, peoples, and perspectives in the plan? And to soften the question with a little precursor of these are talking about our objectives and or our values may help to at the end of the day, and forgive me, during subcommittee meetings, are we still doing the Commissioner White, or are we cool to just say, well,
I probably bounce back and forth inappropriately. My apologies.
oh, no, all good. Well, like Donnell's question was, hey, what are we hoping to achieve with this particular question? And I think, to me, this is the space for people to talk about where they're coming from. This is the open place for narratives, because this isn't specific to, zoning, land use planning, mutually agreeable outcomes and things of that nature. So, this is an area I want people to feel really comfortable answering this question. So I do think that having some level of a cushion of like, this is what we're hoping to do. These are objectives. This is what we value. And how can you help us achieve that? So that is what I think, Donald, this question gets to the core of. Tell us your narrative. Tell us more about yourself, in other words. So.
I was just gonna, yeah, it's like watching everybody on mute. Maybe that's part of the premise in the front too, is like there's qualitative and quantitative contributions to this entire process, and that both are like valid and valuable. So don't feel like you need to be an expert in land use planning, but your lived experience is just as much an expertise. So however that could be framed, because I think that's where it's like, well, I'm not a planner. Why would I do this thing? And it's like, you have a story and can probably help share a lot of other stories. I'm just saying, I was at city council last week. Lisa, you were there, all the renter stories, like that was powerful relative to the data collected. So.
And by the way, Mr. Delacourt swung into action, and the inspections are happening and the management is scurrying around doing inefficacious things, which, because I do not want them to cover up the mess, but that moved like that.
I think the thing I was wondering about with question number 5 is maybe related to the equity study that the city just conducted with the results of who the city often hears from. So one way you could maybe, as you reworded the question, which is fine, if you're going to put maybe a precursor or a preamble on the survey or something where you can link to it, you could just note that the city's own research discovered that we often hear from a similar demographic. So land owning, wealthy, white, and generally women, but sometimes men in there as well. So like, given that we often hear from a specific group, as we go into this process, we were wanting to expand who we hear from. So how can you help us sort of ascertain those stories and those voices so that we're not just hearing from the same groups of folks? Not to diminish, saying it in a way that doesn't diminish anyone, but is an invitation, I think, is the thing here. And I just wanted to understand better what you were hoping with this question. But I think this conversation answered that for me, and I would just put a reference to that if you were creating a preamble.
Yeah, I like that. I think I want to find the balance. Like, I like a link to it, actually, frankly, and a reference to it, because it demonstrates that the city actively cares about this. But I don't want somebody to feel like they need to like research and become an expert in some regard. Just sort of, I like how that puts weight behind, we're serious. We really want to hear from new voices. So. Okay.
And
Uh,
and then I'm sorry, I was processing slowly. So when Lisa started, did she identify that there are target groups we want to identify? And
we're going to get
is-
to that.
okay,
Like,
great,
I think
sorry.
what Lisa was talking about is maybe trying to frame out a rubric so that we could be a little bit more upfront of like, we really want to make sure we hear from renters. We want to make sure we hear from students. We want to make sure we hear from youth. We want to make sure we hear from, and so maybe after this, we could just sort of brainstorm a little bit what that rubric might look like. Describes interests or skills of relevance to the steering committee. I don't love this question, actually. No.
It's just vague. It's vague. I
Yeah,
don't know.
it's kind of vague.
It's
'cause-
redundant.
Could have like a, is there anything else you want us to know question? But I mean, I
Yeah.
don't even know if that's necessary.
That's good. That's actually good. Is there something?
Well,
that
you could, so how do you ask someone who might have language skills or something that we will eventually need, but we don't know that we need? And so it's sort of like a little skills inventory. So like, you know, are there
You do
tools
prompts,
or resources?
like that's a good one. Like,
Yeah.
Like, is there anything else you want to tell us about yourself, or anything else you want us to know? Like, e.g., language, like, or language skills, or I can't think of any others right now. But
Well, right. It could be technology skills, you know, it could be surveys, communication, things like that. Cause people have more skills than they bring that they let you know that they have. And then you discover and you're like, oh my gosh, like you're a graphic artist. And so you could represent all of this using cartoons and you would enjoy doing that. It's like a way that people take notes at meetings. They like draw it as opposed to write it out. And that's a skill. I would love to have that. That's a visual processing thing that would invite more people. So yeah, how do you prompt for that without it feeling like, oh, I know how to take minutes in a meeting? Because that's how I would read that, because it's like a steering committee. What are the things you want in a steering committee? Someone who knows Robert's Rules of Order. And I still have my copy from college. So that's
I've been
my skill.
updated a few times.
No, it was enshrined when I got it and it didn't change.
We talked about moving the excites or concerns you to the front. I'm asking general availability, and I frankly sort of struggled with this one. I thought it just, like, I don't feel like the question is specific enough where I would, and I didn't know that if somebody was only available in one of these categories, we would necessarily not select them for that reason. So I was thinking about just getting rid of that and just instead putting something saying like, hey, we will be trying to coordinate a lot of schedules, would, you know, as we move forward, we'll value your flexibility and accommodation to the greatest extent possible.
Maybe just something that's even like, are there any times that you are definitely not available? And then it can be like a NA instead. Just, I mean, but really it's just to help scheduling when you're gonna, I'm just thinking 8 meetings over 18 months.
how
The
long are you
surveys do
anticipating
that.
these meetings? Like a couple hours each, or I don't know if that's in here.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it probably varies, but I mean, just
It'll probably vary, but I wouldn't want to go more than 2 to 3 hours. People start losing. I've seen a planning fall apart after 3 hours.
I don't know if it would be helpful to just like note that somewhere, because
Okay.
I mean, you know, a 1 hour meeting versus a 7 hour meeting.
Yeah, telling people that you expect these meetings
Setting
to be
expectations.
90 to 180 minutes, or like an hour and a half to 3 hours long, and let people self-select out, because someone will see that and go, I want my voice heard, but not at that cost.
Yeah.
Maybe say
Like
90
when-
to 120, typically 90 to 120 minutes.
But is that going to be true? You have 25 people,
Typically.
and
Typically,
if 25 people speak for 3 minutes, we're at 75 minutes.
I thought you said 20 people.
Okay.
Well, as long as we're disciplined. I'm gonna.
Are we
That's the
included in
facilitator.
that? Is it 20 people? Are we a part of this?
No,
Or
this
are
is
we-
this is sort of an
It's totally
advisory.
separate.
Well,
Okay.
that'll be part of our rubric. There might be a couple of planning commissioners or a planning commissioner on the steering committee. That'll be something we will determine, but
Okay.
generally,
You know, meetings can always break into subgroups, and then the subgroups report so that you get broader participation. If it's always a discussion of 20, there are going to be people who never say a word.
Yeah.
So we're going to want to think about that, but that also enables you to maximize if you have an hour and a half or 2 hours. But I think
I'm gonna put 2 to 3 hours. If people can commit to that and we can do something in an hour and a half, great. But I think a large committee, we're gonna need some time. And I'd rather set the expectation and live up to it than the opposite. So just
you're going to lie and then get them so excited that they'll stay longer.
they'll become planning commissioners. Are you available to commit attending 5 to 7 meetings over the next months? I don't know. This seems kind of dumb, but it seems just like a sort of a gut check. Like, yeah, I definitely want to do this. Yeah, I really want to invest the time. So that's why I like that. Okay. So then
That's
Go
where
ahead.
I like, if we want to do like a follow-up question, that's like, if not, would you be interested in participating in
Yeah.
meetings in another way?
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, I
If
know
they
that-
say no, they're just going to close the window.
Yeah. Sign up.
It's like, thanks for filling this out, but you told us no twice, but okay.
I'm sure we'll get a couple people filling it out, you know, because I'm sure some people fill this out because they want to share some. It's their first opportunity for feedback, right? So, all right. So demographic questions. So, like I said, I've done some modification of this from a recent one that was done for our urban forestry plan. Just to set the stage, we are asking for this information. We're not requiring it. We can't, if we ask for it and it is used in our selection, it can't be private. There's no way that I can shield it. So I'm trying to be honest with people that, hey, you don't have to fill this out. We're not going to widely publish this demographic data, but I just need to be honest that if somebody were to FOIA, please send me the demographic information for all applicants, that information will be available. And so that's what I'm trying to accomplish sort of at the top of this. Do you live or work in Ann Arbor? I imagine this to be a sort of all that apply kind of question.
I'd want to add an other. So like if your kids go to school, you attend church, like what other reasons you might be engaged in Ann Arbor other than live and work?
Should it be other instead of neither?
I mean, you could have neither too, I guess.
Yeah, or like,
Yeah,
Maybe you're like planning to move in, but you
Yeah.
don't yet.
Yeah, that's the question is, are there people who, do we want people who are future residents? And how do we indicate that we do? So if the question is just, do I live or work there, but I don't, but I want to, or I have a different connection. So you might say live, work, or I want to with a blank. And then you could say, if you wanted to hit Lisa's point, the other could have some prompts like school, because school of choice, I think, is a valid one. There are a lot of people who send their kids to Ann Arbor but don't live or work here. And then church is another one. So people come in for that. And then are there other prompts? So you could give a couple examples and then let people fill in the details.
What is your age? I thought about just asking people to put in their age, but I think probably the ranges is better. I don't know why people seem funny about their age sometimes.
This might be a logistical question, but is there any requirement or parental sign-off threshold to participate in something like this from the city?
Great question. I don't know.
I was thinking like if 18, like the 15 to 19. So it might be just something with the attorney to check.
Are we 16 for age of consent? Because it's not like they're entering a contract. So you could just go 16 to 19 and then under 16 and then ask the attorney about that question.
I mean, yeah, my initial thought is when we ask for public input, this is providing public input. It's not really performing a service or providing decisions, but I'll ask that question.
You may
Initial-
run into the 13-year-old thing with data, right? So like, is there
Oh,
some restriction of retaining information about a 13-year-old online? I think there is a rule about that.
Yeah,
So-
and especially if this is FOIA-able information of a minor.
Yeah, thank you. I never thought of that. All right, age categories. Nationality, ethnicity. It's a pretty expansive list. Have added some qualifiers where I thought it would be more inclusive rather than less inclusive. Trying to be this was reviewed by our Director of Organizational Equity, Laura Orda, and they really recommended to me never to use other. And so, because you never want anybody to feel like an other. So I've sort of reclaimed all the sort of open-ended to be something not listed above.
I like that. I just learned something today. That's really helpful.
What is your gender identity? Household income? I thought about more closely tying these to like 60% AMI, but it seemed a little planner nerdy. So I thought that this is still going to give us a sense of household income and a range.
I don't think it's nerdy at all, especially if you go to the rubric and you say we want people in these income tiers for a reason.
All right.
Like maybe like round, so people aren't like, I don't know if I make $62,384 a year as like the tipping point to the next box sort of thing.
But if 65 is a better split than 75, maybe make that. Okay. I'll look at those levels. Do you rep?
Right. Just as long as it's like actual numbers, because I think if you put like, am I between 60 and 80% AMI? I mean, I don't expect.
Yeah, no. I'll do incomes. I think 60 and 80% only matters for like planners and community development.
Yeah. All right.
And niche stuff.
Cool.
Do you rent or own your primary residence or have some other arrangement? I don't know if like a land contract or just couch surfing or you name it. I also thought here about, should there be I don't have a primary residence? I don't know that it could be in the other arrangement.
I can try to look it up, but in this public school registration, it's definitely more than those two.
Yeah.
In terms of the question. I don't remember exactly what they are, but it might be even like living with others or something. Sort of thing. I can try to look that up if you want.
I can probably check too. Yeah, no, thank you. I'll look. I owe AAPS some data, so it's an opportunity for me to get that done so then I can ask them.
My first thought went to ADUs. It's like, hey, I would actually like to know if you live in an ADU and see if our relaxation of those regulations helped. But and then also I think of van dwellers. I actually met a few people who just literally live out of vans. You know those like kind of tricked out vans. But those were the two things. But I don't think it's relevant to actually expanding the inquiry.
Maybe I just leave it as other arrangement, but this is another example where I could show some examples of the types of responses that might be appropriate. Are you a native speaker of any languages other than English? We will also try to provide some translation opportunities for this request, to be clear, but I thought this was an opportunity. It sort of relates to that, like, how can you help us reach different voices? So that was a question we added that wasn't on the previous one. We also added do you identify as a disabled or as a person with a disability? We specifically sort of augmented that with a question that was intended to be more broad, not just for people with disability, but hey, are there any support services or accommodations that would facilitate you to participate in this? Maybe it's somebody that needs particular accommodations for a disability. Maybe it's somebody who needs childcare. Maybe it's somebody who's going to need a meal. Like, we just tried to put together sort of an open-ended question, like, as you're going through this, are there some barrier that you're worried about? This is a great opportunity for you to tell us what you would need in order to be able to participate.
I think giving those examples would be really helpful, because people might be thinking more like mobility or ASL transcriber or something like that, and not childcare specifically. So knowing that those are kind of examples that might be offered up. And that was maybe to like the very beginning, it goes along with, to participate, you must have access to a computer and the internet. If there's a way to connect with, the district library, to be like, if you do not have one, we can help coordinate access as well.
Yeah, I did intend to, yeah, that's a great idea. I struggled with it because we will be transmitting a lot of information digitally and electronically. My intention was to actually have people to be able to just fill out a paper copy of this and drop it off at City Hall or do it online. But I think that I'm sort of thinking about that as sort of an accommodation. Like, if you don't have access to that, but you want to participate, that feels like an insertion point where we can say, let's figure out how we can support that aspect of your participation.
Yeah, and I just want to echo that because some committees that I've served on, they'll do a stipend, which helps with it. So you could use it for childcare, you could use it for food, you could use it to rent a space to sort of meet. So then that sort of gives it equalizes everybody without putting too much attention on one person or another. And then to Lisa's point, I think if we were able to do some coordination with the library once we had the meeting schedule and could either rent a room or reserve a room that had access to a computer with headphones and a microphone, if something like that exists, I think that's another way that really says, hey, we are serious about trying to accommodate someone who doesn't have time in the middle of their day to have an hour-and-a-half meeting, have high-speed internet, cameras, mics, headphones, and all of that. So it would just take that step further to say, we really do want you to be a part of this, as opposed to we sort of do.
And we could even do that at City Hall. And to be clear, like, I'm hoping many of these meetings are actually in person. I think in-person meetings foster a different kind of communication with all due respect to this meeting. And so I don't have a preconception that all of these are, but there probably will be some Zoom meetings. There will be some in-person meetings. I hope more, frankly, in person, because I just think I think if that's going to help with the team building, it's going to help with consensus. But yeah, I think that's a great point. But it doesn't have to be a library. We could do it at City Hall. We could provide a room at City Hall for somebody to come in. So
if you do that, then I would again say making a bus pass available. So what you could do is whoever we select, just send out a note and say some of the meetings will be at City Hall. So we're providing a bus pass. If you would like one, let us know how to get it to you. So then that way everybody gets the same invite, and then the people who need it don't feel special attention placed on them. So whatever we do, if we could just normalize it so that everybody gets the same invitation, I think that lowers shame or guilt or whatever condemnation that people might have to say, do I really belong?
Okay. And then the other one, I think I skipped over, number 9. Please share any other personal lived experiences or demographic information that we should consider. This is kind of a reframing of the question. I think we talked about a little bit with the questions, but maybe intended to be a little bit more focused on demographic information. I don't know. I don't know if we need both. I don't know that it hurts to ask the similar question twice. I don't know if people will be more or less comfortable sort of responding in the demographic category versus the general questions category, but that's where I was coming from. Just recognizing that I might not know all the questions to ask.
I would just frame it as if information we should know instead of consider, since it's in the optional. So it doesn't feel like a weighted question.
Yeah, and not enough. We're not that like it's somehow going to be determinative whether or not you're going to be selected or not. That makes sense. Okay, thank you. Maybe we could just take another, plan on trying to wrap up by like around noon, but I'd love to go back to the question of a rubric, like just brainstorming, what does a successful steering committee feel like to this group? What does it look like? Who's on it?
Can you say again the goals of the committee?
Yeah, so it's intended to be a snapshot of our community, right? A representation of our community. And we're going to go to them at times saying like, this is our community engagement that we've conducted. How does it feel? Do you feel like we've missed anybody? These are the values that have come out of our conversations. Help validate these with us. Are we hearing correctly? These are some of the implementation strategies that we have formed based on this next segment of the work plan and engagement. Keep us honest. Do you think that we are being fair? Are we focusing on the right areas? It's going to be a bit of a editor, right, of our process, so that you as the planning commission, us as staff and the consultants don't get too far in our own heads, and we are being diligent about asking others, is this right? That will lead all the way up to this is the draft document. Do you think it's ready for prime time? Anything that's missing here? Anything we should spend more or less time on? So I know that's pretty vague, but that's its goal. It's intended to be a bit of not a technical steering committee, but a gut check at
Those are the words I was thinking.
Appropriate points in the process.
Thank you. That helps. I mean, I think some of the things that Lisa started throwing out before makes sense. I hate to put people into categories, but like a student, a renter, a homo. I mean, like, do we just start listing out categories and see how we feel about it? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm curious about.
Say, like, we don't have to like have a line for each person, but we just have to say across these, do we check, do we cover these sorts of themes or categories of representation? Maybe
like
just
age, racial diversity, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then we also have ambassadors, right? We have a steering committee and we have ambassadors. I'm just kind of rewinding just a second. As like two other those are the two main community touch points, right?
Yeah.
And I believe interface confirmed, maybe to Donnell's point, a budget for ambassadors, and they are kind of community experts in areas to invite people and get people connected. Was a budget specifically allocated for steering committee? Maybe it's just homework, but it is a question. They should both, valued and measured that way.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Definitely a budget for ambassadors, but I don't know if we were planning on steering committee stipends or whatever. But let me take a step back. I can't speak for Councilmember Dish and her colleagues, but here's my sense is that the one thing I know is that we are going to start community engagement, and if we do this well, we're going to find holes. We're going to find underrepresentation in areas, and we're going to have to find ways to hear from those voices to make sure that we are getting to a point where we're like, yes, we feel like the decisions, the values that are made, and that might mean that we need to go and amend our scope or adjust our scope in some way, or it could mean that we need to find additional resources. My gut is that everybody in this community is really interested in this being a successful process, and if that's determined to be necessary, I'm not going to say to you, we don't have a budget for the steering committee, so we can't do childcare, or we can't do bus pass, or we can't do stipends. I think everybody's interested in finding the way to do that, and so I'll answer that question. But regardless, I think that there's support to find the ways to do that. And frankly, the consultants that were responding are probably they're probably in part responding with budgets and proposals that are more typical, that might not include that. And so they were probably in some ways trying to be responsive to some of those realities. You know, we told them we've got $700,000. How are we going to allocate that? And so if we need $750,000, Lisa and the council can say yes or no. We have other priorities, or yeah, we think this is a no-brainer. This is helping us hear from better voices, and we're going to do it. Lisa's about to tell me I'm hopefully not terribly off base.
You are totally on base.
Okay.
And I just wanted to offer that in the work that the Community Leadership Council has done with OSI and Jen Hall, and also this other group actually that Jenny Petoskey has been running that's very similar. Just if you can reach out to Jenny Petoskey and also Jennifer Hall about how they worked compensation and offsetting of expenses. I think it would be, it's really important. It's absolutely important to do it. And as Donnell said earlier, to normalize all of this stuff so that everybody gets a stipend. It's not about need. It's not about singling out some people as need. It's about everybody's time is valuable. And then for these things, if you need an X, Y, or Z, bus pass, childcare, blah, 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 we can handle that too. And there are ways of doing this so that it doesn't get all hung up in a very complex budget requisitioning process. And Jenny Petoskey and Jen Hall figured all that out.
Thank you.
Brad, I think the question of what is the composition of the steering committee look like? So I've just been looking up like different cities, steering committees and things like that. And I can't help but feel like, you know, it seems like a lot of different cities. I'm looking at the city of Novi, which is a lot more kind of suburban and kind of spread out, but it seems like they actually have more professional kind of steering assistants. So they have planning engineering consultants. They have actually a lot of planning staff. It seems like they have like 4 or 5. So I'm just trying to, in my head, and I'm sorry, maybe I should have done this at the very onset before this, obviously, you know, hour about, it's a great discussion. I'm just wondering, tell me how this is going to differ significantly from like a focus group, for example, right? So I see on the schedule, there's a lot of focus groups, and we clearly do have, you know, value. I think it's very clear, and again, getting like as much diverse perspectives, having inclusion within, and you know, hearing from the people that are, you know, normally less represented. But as far as the composition of the steering committee, from what I'm seeing from other cities' case studies, it seems like it's more kind of like a professional advisory board. And so I just wanted to get your take on better understanding your, your understanding. There's 3 pugs and they, sorry, I apologize. So it seems like other cities like Madison, Boulder, you know, I've just been looking up kind of like comparable cities. Novi is the one that actually had a master plan steering committee. So just wanted to check with you. I'm trying to check myself on the composition.
I think that, so I envision this steering committee being that gut check. And I think that we are going to be bringing enough technical expertise to this from planning staff, from the planning commission, from our consultant team. So I don't feel like the steering committee is a place that needs to be loaded with planners and engineers and architects, frankly. It ideally is our sounding board for our community. We're going to be asking the community directly for a lot of feedback and input and the like. But this is another opportunity for this group to say, like, let's make sure we ask this. Sort of like this conversation we're having now, but we're sort of widening that, right? We will have, I want to be honest, behind the scenes, there's going to be a lot of technical expertise that happens. There's going to be like, hey, staff working with the Environmental Commission, what are the priorities? Staff working with the Transportation Commission, anything out of the transportation plan you'd like to evolve? We are going to be doing a lot of that conversation while we're asking those questions of the community. So I don't envision the steering committee to be solely those people. That said, as I said from the outset, I might come to you and say, like, I think we should fill 12 seats from this, and I would recommend we have 8 more seats that we want to fill in the following ways. I just want to be honest. I don't have a preconception that all are going to come from this. Maybe the steering committee does end up being a blend of that. I kind of want to wait and see who is interested in a way. As it relates to the steering committee versus focus groups, the focus groups are going to be a little bit more specialized. Probably not going to be using the focus groups to say, what do you think about our community engagement plan? But rather, we might say, hey, we want to have some dedicated conversation. We put a stake in the ground saying, like, we really care about sustainability. How is this plan advancing that narrative? How is this plan advancing our policy goals so that we are achieving that? Or maybe it's about corridors. We're having a lot of conversation about TC1 and setbacks and uses there, and how or how not that district is going to cultivate the uses that we hope it does. And so that might be a focus area. So that's how I see the focus groups being a little bit different than the steering committee. I really think of the steering committee as an intermediary between everybody and the people actually rolling up our sleeves and doing the work to say, yeah, I think you're on the right track, or I think we're missing the voices that we're hearing from the community in this regard. Does that help?
I think so. What might be also just procedurally, there's 5 to 7 meetings, right? So yeah. Does that happen, like the preparation leading up to it? Does that break pretty much all of those kinds of like focus groups? I'm just thinking procedurally, like when does that sounding board happen relative to work?
Yeah, I could put some more detail about that. We think that the second meeting is going to be a review of the goals for the plan, or we think that the first meeting is going to be a 75% through community engagement check-in to see whether or not we are asking the right questions of the right. So I could try to do that. I was frankly just being at really high level to recognize that as this process moves, it might evolve, but both can be true. I could do a little bit more upfront to say, and I want to be careful about not overwhelming people versus providing them. But I think one of the other things that you mentioned that is probably helpful is maybe just explaining those differences. You know, what's the difference between a focus group and a steering committee, so that might be really nice augmented information for, hey, if you're not interested in this, how else do you want to be involved? Here's some other opportunities.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. And for me, kind of when Lisa was saying, hey, like there's different blocks or representations that we may want to have, like for me, it was like geographical, like within the city. Is it wards? Do we want a person from each ward? I don't know that that's necessarily the right answer. Or is it different types of professions, like a business owner that's, you know, a large business owner with 1,000+ employees, or, you know, a small business owner versus so I'm actually just talking out loud here, so let me actually take some time to consolidate my thoughts, and I'll let somebody else speak for the time being.
Yeah, so I'm just starting a list. So far I've got renter, owner, students, youth, geographical types of professions. I think this, I'd appreciate any other brainstorming. Like, we might end up with a list of 10, we might end up with a list of 40, but I think it'd be helpful that'd be helpful for what comes back and is recommended. I'm going to jump in. Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, so I was thinking that downtown resident might be interesting. I do not think we need ward representation. I was thinking that someone who doesn't live in Ann Arbor, definitely. I don't quite know how to, I mean, I don't know if we want to further specify that category. Are we interested in someone who rents outside of Ann Arbor? rather than someone who owns outside of Ann Arbor, because those are different people. And if we're trying to get at people who wish they could live here. I don't know if owners outside of Ann Arbor wish they could live here, but I bet renters might. But I'm making tons of assumptions that I have no data to back up.
So would it be too limiting to say we want a non-resident, an individual who doesn't live here but works here? Or do we want to be more broad that it might be somebody who does neither but wishes that they could?
I think that non-resident would be great. And then we have a questionnaire that elicits a lot of information where the person could express, I would live here if I could, but I can't afford your rents. Another thing I wondered is if, I do not know, but what Wanwu was just saying was sort of making me realize, oh, I wonder if it would be helpful to have an independent business owner. Because it just sounds like, some of our land use decisions, we are worried that they may have effects of pricing out people who are not national chains and who are trying to make a living in Ann Arbor. I'm just kicking this out, and I'm totally willing to be.
Yeah. But I think the more ideas, the better.
And I don't know if, I think maybe we would, I think almost certainly we would like to get someone who is not able to, ride a bike or walk with ease. So I think we want some representation of how well are we doing at creating an Ann Arbor that, differently able people can move around in. So, yeah, so I'll let other people continue to spitball.
When we identify youth, I'm going to ask for 4 spots for them. And the reason why I'm asking for 4 is if there are 20, it should balance out. It's like a quarter of the group. I think a quarter of the group should be in that youth category so that we don't put all of the pressure on one youth to represent all young people in the city. And there are 16 other spots for everybody else. So that's my justification for why I think there should be like an actual number that we try to hit. And then if we're going to do independent business owners, then I think we should try to get representation from across the city so that they're not like concentrated in Carytown or they're concentrated on the north side, because I think the demographics of each of our neighborhoods does sort of change what you care about, if I could say it that way. And maybe another way to do that, if we felt like that was too limiting, would be to do newer independent business owners. So someone who has started or opened a business within the city within the last 5 years or so, as opposed to an embedded person, because I think they'll both bring different experiences that will be helpful. And especially as we get into conversations around like multi-use, which is a huge part of the conversation. I just saw someone the other day. It was like, oh, all these apartment buildings are coming with retail on the first floor, but no one's able to lease it. And so I'd rather have neighbors than those empty spaces. And there was a whole news article in MLive about how hard it is to get those spaces rented. And that seems to be universal across the city. So how then do we get a representation from the right business owner to help us sort of process like the density that you would need in order to sustain a business like that? So that's where I'm going with that question. Community organizers are folks who I would love to see at the conversation or at the table, because these are folks who work with people every day, and they do a lot of organizing work, whether that's, services or support and aid. So how do we identify those folks? I think you could just put a label in there and they could self-identify, but they have really rich networks and they're able to talk to people that a lot of us don't come into proximity with on a daily basis. And then I had I don't know how to ask this one, so I'll just say it, and like Lisa, you can filter it. So one of the things that I learned is that it is difficult for, I'm going to say it this way, first generation educated individuals to find their way within the city. So let me back into that. When I got to my daughter's middle school, I discovered there were no Black faculty at the middle school. So I asked, how is this possible? And I got a lot of information like, oh, one, folks who are interested in working with underprivileged students, they don't come to districts like Ann Arbor because it's hard to live here because they can't afford it with their education, with their income levels. And it's hard to create social networks to make living here enjoyable. And I hadn't thought about that. So how do we talk about that in this context? Like, are we building out a city of affluent folks that meet a certain demographic? And so it automatically prevents us from having a different kind of person live here. So lots of disjointed things, but I think you can piece together what I'm sort of getting at, but I don't know how to label that because it's very, very nuanced, but it is salient. So as I talk to like Black graduate students, they talk about how difficult it is to find networks of social groups. And so how do we get that into this conversation so that we don't keep building a city that makes that reality more present, I think is where I'm trying to go. And I'll think more about it to see if I can give you some more handholds, but I just wanted to put that into the conversation.
I think a piece of that is probably, I'll confess I hate the term a little bit, but sometimes workforce housing is invoked as sort of early stage career individuals, and that's a gap in our housing supply. And but I know I think I understand what you're getting at, Lisa. By the way, we're up to 25 based on some random assignment of numbers.
But you might have an owner or a renter that's organizer.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm going to back up again, or maybe think forward, relative to should the questionnaire have occupation on it relative to some of these questions that we're now having? Like, do we actually have the proper things in the questionnaire? And then how do you want to follow up on the questionnaire? Is it going to be on it's Friday already, on the agenda for Tuesday for the full planning commission? Just email it out, or just take our stuff and we trust you to remedy and post it?
You're giving me feedback. I'm going to get this finalized. My hope next week is to publish it. I was thinking about having it open probably for like 3 weeks. And that would at least get us into the school year. And so, yeah, no, I am going to filter, hopefully successfully, the feedback that you've gotten, and I'm going to get this out. And then I'm going to, when I come back, if you'd like, maybe we have a follow-up meeting on this rubric while the call is out. And then I could apply that before I present what comes to you. For example, one of the things I was going to experiment with was probably anonymizing the people and just giving you responses of some of the demographic data and the occupation. I think that's a great point. We need to ask that if that's something we want to consider. But that would be something we could approach, is like, I could get this thing published in all of its perfection or imperfection. And then we could start working on, based on that information, how would you like me to sort of present the information to you with some recommendations?
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, because I'm just like, this maybe was like an early exercise to make sure we had some of these things in the
Yeah.
questionnaire, because some of these kind of pieces of involvement might be helpful to unpack, but I trust you'll figure out how to integrate them into some of the questions.
Yeah. The ones that jump out to me to that regard, I think, are I think community organizers. Hopefully, we hear from that a little bit on the how can you help us achieve our goals. A lot of the geographic and age is going to help us, I think, with a lot of that information. Frankly, the renter owner status, of course. Occupation is something that I think, if that's a piece of it, we need to identify. I think there's probably a way to tease out independent business owners and occupation, maybe in sort of some similar questions. The sort of first generation one, I agree. I don't know exactly how to ask that. If I feel like lost on the best way to get that information or any of these, it's probably that one. But
Okay.
I'd like to get it out.
Yep.
So
that helps.
yeah.
I mean,
this-
I would just say, like, ethnicity would be a good one to have on here somewhat. Like, we just don't want 25 white people. I don't want to, put line items of specificity, but just that we have that diversity. And I guess it's kind of the same how I would measure how, like, Donna has like 25%. Maybe it is like at least reporting out in the first recommendations how many are renters and owners. And that way we're not like assigning these maybe to specificity, but it's looking at the overall makeup as part of the report out, instead of being like, we have one, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, who's the one? So I know this is maybe like a little bit further, but yeah, like, who's the one non-resident? Instead we can just say, yeah, 85% are residents or something like that. So
Yeah.
I think those sorts of ways is more of kind of the feedback I want to give, that we're thinking about proportions instead of individual representations. So I think with that, I would say, I don't know if it's like a disabilities, I think is one that's important, that I don't think is specifically on here. So kind of recognizing the mobility, physical, mental, like all of that sort of disability aspects of it would be neat. And then I know the first time we went around, like, aging in place, like, really it's like finding the extremes. Like, if you make a city for the extremes and gut check, you're going to average out. So however that might be in retirement or something like that. So those are the kind of the other pieces I'm thinking.
Yeah, youth and aging in place, you accomplish a lot in between those. You actually accomplish everything for everyone.
To add to that, I will say, Lisa, row 10, the individual with accessibility needs, to me that was kind of the more mobility needs. But yes, I think that is actually very important, which actually leads me to think that if the comprehensive plan is an effort to consolidate the different areas of our natural features plan, sustainability element, etc., I almost think like somebody with a specific interest in those particular areas, to me, make a lot of sense. So somebody that's really passionate about parks and recreation, somebody who is very passionate and has a pretty deep history in natural features and downtown plans. So maybe kind of saying, hey, it makes sense for somebody to have an interest in sustainability framework, and that person should be on sounding committee for that. So for me, maybe an element of saying, hey, this person represents or has a vested passion in one element that makes up our current comprehensive plan. And that can probably align with a lot of the other kind of criteria that we are putting forth. So that's my one recommendation. The other is I think we're making kind of I also want to see how it just all plays out, right? It's one thing for us to have like a vision of to be prescriptive about the different I have. At the end of the day, we'll see who applies, right? Get 10 people to apply, and you're like, oh, okay. So it's kind of seeing how the question, that eventually I think we'll want to also grapple with is how this is kind of broadcast. I'm sure you have your normative mediums, but just for me, I mean, I think this is helpful to say this would be an idealized kind of aggregation of a steering committee, but that almost to me, I'm like, let's see who applies as well. So, but for me, more concretely, somebody that is able to sufficiently cover each element of the current comprehensive plan. So, and it can really fall into those other buckets as well, but something that is very cleanly kind of like, this person definitely loves parks. So, and then university, for what it's worth. I know they're going through their own master or comprehensive plan right now. That's, I don't know if that's, if I'm being touchy about that, but I also think coordinating to a certain extent is important. So, but yeah.
Sarah?
This is not why I raised my hand, but as long as we're doing sort of an exercise in, making sure it's not 25 white people, let's also just do gender while we're sort of slicing that. I was curious how you're planning on distributing this and if you want us to also help promote.
Yeah. So my goal is going to be to get this into a very accessible online. It's probably going to be an online form. Like I said, I'm also going to have paper copies. So if somebody wants to, they can mail it in or come in and fill it out. I'm going to provide some options on that. But then once that is out, we'll be sharing it on social media. We'll be putting it on the website. I'll probably do a press release for the press that we have. But yes, I will share that with the Planning Commission. I would ask you to share it widely. I hope that we have to choose between 500 people for these 20 spots. I think that would be hard and fantastic. So
cool. Yep. I hope it's more than 10.
Yeah.
Maybe can I just add it would be helpful if we do a meeting or as you prepare the rubric to look at Ann Arbor or Greater Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County relative to those proportions of renters, gender, like all sorts of representation as a qualifier for kind of that matchup.
Yeah. I think I would really value your help in another meeting to sort of go through that exercise. What I'd like to do is actually sort of, I'll probably start with some sort of kind of scoring rubric that how, like, if we get 500 applications, this is how I'm going to go about it. But yeah, I think if you're willing, maybe we could set up another meeting in a couple of weeks where I could present some ideas. You could help me refine that. And then that's largely then what I will use when I come back to you with respondents to it. Awesome.
Just a word of caution on the proportions. I just, a part of me is like to be progressive. We almost want to be the inverse of like the existing, proportions to be try to reverse the perpetuation of specific, proportions. But that being said, I also get, 85% owners versus, or residents versus out of towners. Actually, that doesn't even make sense. But I hope just a word of caution, using proportions as the prescriptive normative for, this is how many people we should have. Just be careful.
Yeah, I guess I don't want to speak for Lisa. I wasn't hearing that was going to sort of guide us, but I think that's helpful data for when we're setting those targets. We know, are we moving in the right direction or not?
Yeah, 100%.
Lisa?
There was one more thing that I wanted to throw in the mix, which is service providers, which I think is not, and I don't know that it needs to be a separate category because some of this will come out in the questionnaire and we'll see people who are working with refugee populations, for example, or who are working with, who work with Community Action Network, for example. But that would be something to have an eye out for. I would, I've been thinking about whether we would want a planning commissioner on this steering committee, and I think probably not. But I think that it's important that the planning commission be informed about the discussions that are happening on this steering committee. And so I think as the process evolves, we'll figure out how that can best be done, because the idea is that this committee is going to help us continually framing and reframing and looking at the results we're getting from the public outreach that we're doing and the questions we're asking. So I want to make sure that they're not just in a silo by themselves, but I don't necessarily think it's a good idea for a planning commissioner to be on there, because I feel like the possibility of that person just getting authority without and deference without, and that isn't the thing that we want to do. For similar concerns about authority and deference, I don't think that I would want representation of the university on this committee. But I'm happy to be I'm happy to hear other, obviously, views on that. But so, yeah, I won't even explain why, I'll just say that.
I just wonder if there's like I kind of agree, like there's like that power, but a non-participating observer to report out and a first person as a variation of that, but just spitball.
Yeah. I agree. Maybe what we do is actually we do designate a couple of planning commission as sort of ad hoc members that are. It's not necessary. I am comfortable transmitting information, feedback, guidance from that board to the planning commission. I do selfishly always appreciate it when I have commissioners that are helping to communicate things from another group to the full planning commission. I think that has value. I think you as commissioners, it's not that you don't value staff, but I think you do value your colleagues. In that, I think, Lisa, you do a good job of that at City Council when you provide, I always think, a really nice balanced overview of projects. So maybe we start from the premise that no, we're not going to appoint anybody, but then we sort of tackle that question if we just want to designate a couple of planning commissioners to be at the table and help communicate what's happening at that table and be disciplined about letting that steering committee go where it wants to go without sort of asserting that sort of expertise or authority in any way.
Sounds good. Brett, do you need anything further from us? I know we're kind of getting up to the 12:30 time.
Yep. No, thank you for taking the time. This has been really helpful. I wasn't planning on that rubric meeting. That's super logical. It makes a lot of sense. It's going to make our job a lot easier as well. So I'll work on getting that scheduled here, probably in the same method I did before. And yeah, have a great weekend.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Lisa Sove, can I call you?
Sure.
Or can you just stick on for a minute?
Yep.
All right. Thanks.
What's up?
Hold on. Let me stop recording.